You know that feeling when you step onto a treadmill, but the person who was using it right before you left it running on an absolute dead sprint?
Oh, yeah, and you're just terrified to look down.
Right. Your legs are just flying, and you know there's like no physical way you can maintain that pace. That hyperspeed exhaustion is exactly what navigating the modern digital asset landscape feels like right now.
It really does. I mean, we're currently living in this 15-minute pump.fun meta where 1,000 new tickers launch, they gain traction, and then they completely evaporate before your morning coffee even cools down.
It is
It's an
exhausting.
incredibly exhausting environment to operate in.
Well,
And what we're seeing in the sources today is that this burnout is actually triggering a fundamental shift in how people assign value to digital networks.
welcome to the deep dive. If you're listening right now and feeling that exact burnout we're talking about, today is about stepping off the treadmill. We're going to explore the hidden origin story of one of the biggest tech networks on the planet, which is Solana.
Yeah, because according to the stack of sources we're pulling from today, Solana didn't actually start out as Solana.
No, it didn't. And our sources for this include historical GitHub commit logs, early Rust package documentation, and a really in-depth analytical breakdown from a writer known as Normie Crypto. Its original prototype was actually called Silk.
Right. And our mission today is to figure out how understanding this kind of, unforgeable digital history acts as a strategic antidote to that relentless crypto hype cycle we just mentioned.
Exactly.
Because that is the core argument we really need to pull apart here. I mean, the Normie Crypto article makes a very sharp distinction between the concept of renting a fleeting asset versus actually owning a piece of infrastructure history.
Renting versus owning. I like that framing.
Yeah, because when you interact with these hyper-trending short-term tokens, you are essentially just renting them. Their entire value is predicated on fleeting, highly localized attention. But when you shift your focus to foundational primitives, like the original unaltered blueprints of a major network, you tap into something called the Lindy effect.
Right, the Lindy effect. I've heard that mentioned in tech circles before. My understanding is that it's a theory about longevity, right?
Exactly.
Like basically, if a technology or a concept has survived for 10 years, you can expect it to survive for at least another 10. It's a way of measuring inherent staying power.
That's a really good working definition.
Yeah.
I mean, the longer something survives in a competitive environment, the longer its future life expectancy becomes.
Makes sense.
So in the context of digital networks, this means early primitives and origin names have natural staying power because their history is fixed. A developer today can easily manufacture 10,000 new tokens in a single afternoon,
Oh, easily.
but they absolutely cannot go back in time and rewrite a historical piece of code from 2017. The unforgeable history of an original blueprint just cannot be diluted by an oversupply of new trends.
So if I'm trying to wrap my head around this mechanically, in the current fast food crypto meta, it feels like playing a massive game of musical chairs.
Oh, for sure.
You're completely stressed out, you're running around, and relying entirely on a specific group of people staying interested just long enough for you to grab a seat before the music stops.
Right.
But if millions of new tokens can be spun up out of thin air in a day, doesn't that make something with an unalterable fixed history incredibly rare?
It makes it definitively scarce.
Mm.
I mean, that's why the sources frame this as an asymmetric play for anyone participating in this space. Chasing the daily noise requires perfect execution and nonstop screen time.
Which nobody has.
Right, but holding something with true digital provenance allows you to essentially ignore the intraday noise. You're anchoring yourself to something the market is mathematically incapable of reproducing.
Okay, well, let's ground this in the actual evidence then, because if provenance is the antidote to the hype, we really need to understand how history is actually recorded in these systems. The sources point to the original documented origin of Solana. Where does that paper trail begin?
So, the primary evidence takes us back to late 2017 and early 2018. We're looking at the foundational work of Anatoly Yakovenko and Greg Fitzgerald.
Okay.
Before there was a global ecosystem processing billions of dollars in daily volume, it was just these developers drafting a radical new architecture for a high-throughput network.
Right, the very beginning.
Exactly. And if you pull up the historical GitHub logs, they originally published this architecture using a Rust programming package named Silk. Specifically, the foundational code we're looking at was version 0.3.3.
Version 0.3.3.
Yeah, and it was housed within a larger code repository titled Loom Protocol.
Okay, I want to pause right there for a second, because for anyone listening who doesn't spend their day deep in the weeds of software development, A GitHub commit log just sounds like saving a file, you
Oh, I
know?
see what you mean.
Like if I use a basic word processor, I can open a document from 2017, change a few words, hit save, and maybe mess with my computer's clock to make it look like I never touched it. How is a GitHub commit mathematically unforgeable?
Yeah, it's a vital distinction to make. Git, which is the version control system that platforms like GitHub use, it doesn't just save a document. It utilizes cryptographic hashing.
Hashing, okay.
Right. When a developer commits a piece of code, the system takes the contents of those files, along with the timestamp and the author's details, and it runs it all through a mathematical algorithm. This produces a unique, fixed string of characters called a hash.
So it basically creates a digital fingerprint.
Yes, a very specific fingerprint. And here's why it is unforgeable.
Yeah.
That fingerprint is intrinsically tied to the exact state of the code at that precise millisecond in 2017.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. If you try to go back today and change even a single comma in that historical file, the mathematical output, the hash, completely changes.
And everyone would see it.
Exactly. Because every subsequent update in the history of the project builds upon the previous hash. Altering the past breaks the entire chain of history. Everyone looking at the public repository would instantly see that the historical record was tampered with.
Okay, that makes total sense.
That is why an original Git commit from version 0.3.3 of the Silk package is considered a permanent, immutable artifact.
That clarifies a lot. So we have this mathematically sealed blueprint from 2017 called Silk, and it's living inside the Loom protocol repository. But obviously, we don't call the network Silk or Loom today. We call it Solana.
Right.
If this original blueprint was so foundational, why did they abandon the name?
Well, the sources indicate it was a necessary tactical pivot. Around the time they were preparing to release version 0.4.0 of their code, they ran into a significant naming collision.
A naming collision.
Yeah, there was an entirely unrelated project operating in the Ethereum ecosystem called Loom Network.
Oh, okay. And the sources mentioned that Loom Network was an Ethereum Layer 2 project.
Yes.
Framework built on top of a main blockchain to help process transactions faster and cheaper. Correct.
That's exactly right. The main chain handles the core security, and the Layer 2 handles the heavy traffic. So you have this Ethereum Layer 2 project called Loom Network that is already gaining traction at the time.
I see where this is going.
Yeah. Anatoly and Greg realized that if they launch a completely separate independent blockchain also using the word Loom, it's just going to cause massive confusion for developers, investors, and users.
Totally. I can see that. If you're trying to build brand new ground-up infrastructure, the last thing you want is people assuming you're just like an extension of someone else's project.
Precisely. They were trying to build a standalone, high-performance machine. They couldn't afford a trademark headache or brand confusion right out of the gate. So they made the administrative decision to rename the GitHub organization and the prototype itself.
And they landed on Solana.
Yes. They named it after Solana Beach, which is this small coastal town just north of San Diego where Anatoly, Greg, and some of the other early core contributors used to live, surf, and work.
I have to admit that feels a bit, I don't know, underwhelming.
Really? How so?
Well, if Silk and Loom were the foundational DNA of the network, didn't they lose a significant piece of their identity by changing it just to avoid a naming collision? It kind of sounds like they just looked out the window, saw the beach, and went, all right, let's just go with that. Was Solana really just an administrative backup plan?
On the surface, it definitely looks like a standard administrative pivot. But this is where reading the original documentation becomes so illuminating.
Okay, I'm listening.
Because the sources argue that the original names, Silk and Loom, were never just placeholders. They weren't random dictionary words pulled out of a hat. They were a brilliantly elegant description of the underlying technology itself.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. Even though the name changed on the front end, the mechanical DNA of Silk is still exactly how the network operates today.
Well, let's dig into that mechanism then. What is the actual technical connection between a Loom, Silk, and a blockchain?
Let's start with the mechanical device. What is the primary function of a physical loom?
It's a machine used for weaving. You feed raw threads into it, and it organizes them, crosses them over each other in a specific pattern, and weaves them together to create a solid piece of fabric.
Correct. Now, what kind of thread do you weave into a loom if you want to create the most structurally resilient, lightweight, and high-quality material possible?
Well, you weave silk.
Exactly. The naming convention was a literal mirror of the project's foundational architecture. When Anatoly and Greg were drafting this code. They were trying to solve one of the biggest bottlenecks in digital networks.
Which was?
How do you process thousands of transactions at the exact same time without the system crashing or getting confused about which transaction happened first?
Right, because older networks really struggle with that. If you look at early architectures, they process data sequentially. It's like they take one single chunky piece of yarn, process it, verify it, and then move on to the next piece of yarn.
Yes, exactly.
It's safe, but it's incredibly slow. If you try to shove 10,000 pieces of yarn through at once, the whole system just tangles up.
That is a perfect analogy. Those older networks have to pause constantly to get all the computers around the world to agree on the exact time a transaction occurred. Anatoly's breakthrough was a mechanism called proof of history.
Okay, I've seen that term constantly in the sources, but I've rarely seen it actually explained well. How does proof of history act like a loom?
So proof of history essentially creates a cryptographic universal clock for the network. Instead of the network pausing to ask, hey, did transaction A happen before transaction B? Proof of history timestamps every single data point as it enters the system.
Oh, I see.
Because everything is perfectly timestamped in advance, the network doesn't have to process them one by one in a single file line. It can intake thousands of parallel transactions, which are the threads, simultaneously.
So the network architecture is the loom.
Yes.
It takes in thousands of individual transactions, the silk threads, all at the exact same time. And because they are already timestamped, it can weave them seamlessly into this massive, flawless digital ledger at lightning speed without any tangling.
That is the exact technical reality of what they built.
Yeah.
It wasn't just a clever branding exercise, it was a cryptographic primitive. Silk described exactly how the ledger worked.
That is incredibly elegant. Wow. But the sources don't just stop at the mechanical metaphor, do they? There's a whole other layer to this naming convention that ties into internet history.
There is. And to truly understand the weight of that original v.3.3 commit, you have to look at the cultural context of the developers who were building this architecture in the late 2010s.
Right.
For veteran cryptography engineers at that time, the word silk carried profound historical significance. It was an unmistakable, deliberate homage to the genesis of decentralized internet commerce, the Silk Road.
Okay, I want to push back on this quite a bit, actually.
Sure.
Because when most people hear the Silk Road, they immediately think of the highly publicized, illicit darknet marketplace operated by Ross Ulbricht. It has a very controversial, highly scrutinized reputation.
It definitely does.
So why would developers building a network meant to scale to billions of legitimate users intentionally invoke the name of an underground black market website? Are the sources suggesting they wanted to align with that illicit activity?
No, it's a critical question, but the sources are very careful to draw a hard line here. The homage is absolutely not an endorsement of the illicit goods sold on that marketplace.
Okay, good to clarify.
Yeah, when early cryptography developers invoked the concept of the Silk Road, they were paying respect to the pure technological breakthrough it represented at a structural level.
So we need to separate the human behavior from the software architecture.
Exactly.
What was the breakthrough?
Well, before the Silk Road existed, the idea that you could have a purely decentralized ledger, which was just Bitcoin at the time, was mostly just theoretical talk on cryptography message boards.
Right, it was just an idea.
People wondered if you could actually facilitate borderless, frictionless commerce without a bank, a credit card company, or a nation-state acting as a middleman. The digital Silk Road was the very first real-world proof of concept that this technology actually worked.
So I see.
It proved that two people on opposite sides of the planet could exchange value over a peer-to-peer network with absolute finality.
Okay, so the original physical Silk Road from centuries ago connected the East and West for the first time through trade routes.
Right.
The digital Silk Road proved that parallel, open, peer-to-peer systems could facilitate a new kind of global internet economy.
Precisely. And by choosing Silk as the absolute foundational bedrock for their new protocol, the founders of this network were signaling a very clear intention.
Which was?
They wanted to carry forward that raw cypherpunk promise of an unstoppable borderless web. But their goal was to build a machine, the loom, that could finally optimize that dream to handle the transaction volume of the entire globe. They were taking a raw proof of concept and engineering it for mass scale.
It's about bridging the ethos of the early Wild West internet with the actual infrastructure needed for modern global finance.
Yes, and this cultural tethering brings us right back to why the sources argue that holding provenance is the ultimate strategy against the current digital asset meta.
Right, getting off the treadmill.
Exactly. Most of the trending tokens launching on these 15-minute intervals today have zero historical grounding. They are spun up in seconds, they rely on brief visual memes, and their cultural relevance is entirely artificially manufactured in group chats. They have no root systems.
Yeah, I mean, if I want to launch a token today, I can just copy someone else's smart contract code. I can generate a logo with AI, and I can clone a website in under 5 minutes. The barrier to entry is basically zero.
But you cannot copy a cryptographic Git commit from the genesis era of a major blockchain. You cannot artificially manufacture an organic connection to the dawn of internet culture.
Right.
The original documentation of Silk is digital archaeology. In fact, the sources point out that modern tokens exist today specifically to memorialize this unalterable history.
I actually saw that in the Normie crypto piece. It mentions a token called OG Silk, but the numbers attached to it are really surprising.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it says the market cap is around $25.82, and there is a fixed supply of 999.61 million tokens. Just to clarify, in the world of global tech networks, a $25,000 market cap is completely microscopic.
It's entirely a microcap. But that is actually the exact point the source is making. It's not designed to be a multi-billion-dollar financial instrument that you aggressively trade back and forth.
Oh, I get it.
A fixed token like that exists essentially as a live historical artifact permanently etched onto the chain. It represents that original v.3.3 era. It's a digital nod to the unforgeable root system we've been talking about.
So what does this all mean for you, the person listening right now, who might just be trying to figure out how to navigate this space without completely burning out?
Well, it means you don't have to play the hyperspeed game if you don't want to.
Exactly. You don't have to spend your days frantically trying to outrun algorithms, staring at charts, and hoping you get a seat before the music stops. Taking the time to understand this deep lore, like the mechanical reality of the loom, the thousands of parallel threads, the cypherpunk history of the Silk Road, and the unforgeable mathematics of an early GitHub commit. It allows you to actually see the fixed, unalterable root systems of the infrastructure you are using. You transition from renting a trend to appreciating an artifact.
And that transition leads to a really fascinating thought to walk away with today.
Yeah.
Think about the overarching trajectory of these digital ecosystems. Right now, in the grand scheme of technology, they're still relatively young. But as they mature over the next few decades, as they eventually onboard hundreds of millions or maybe even billions of everyday users, how will future generations view these Genesis artifacts?
Oh, that's a profound question.
Right. If an original cryptographic commit from 2017 is mathematically impossible to copy, alter, or forge, will the very first lines of code for a digital network eventually be treated with the exact same reverence as ancient physical artifacts?
You mean, will a digital token or a string of code representing that first blueprint eventually be viewed by future digital historians the way we currently look at an ancient Roman coin behind glass in a museum?
Exactly. When you strip away the noise of the daily charts, you are left with the foundational building blocks of a new digital era.
It completely changes how you look at the screen in front of you. It really does make you want to step off that treadmill, let your coffee cool down for a second, and appreciate the immense technical history that was woven into the network before the rest of the world even knew it existed.
It certainly provides a grounding perspective on the foundation beneath your feet.
It absolutely does. Well, thanks for taking this deep dive with us. We'll see you next time.